Hello crafters and welcome back to the HobbyMaker tutorial YouTube site, and thanks for joining me. I'm James Hembrow and we're going to carry on having a look at the series of Introduction to Stamping and ink pads. And I thought after doing some of our first stamps in the last video, if you're following me through, then it would be really good just to have a think about why we would possibly choose different inks over others depending on what we're going to do with them. How do we choose from all those inks that I've shared with you over these videos, which one do I choose and which one would I use, James? Well, that's what I'm going to help you with here, because really what you want to do is just have a think about, it's all a little bit of experiment, but what are you going to do with your finished project? Are you going to colour it in with watercolours? Maybe you're going to go in with something like this, like a watercolour brush and some paint palettes that you could use as well with them. Maybe you're going to go in with some acrylic paints, maybe you're going to use some alcohol markers that you're going to use to colour it in. Maybe you're going to leave it as it is and die cut it out. There's so many different things that you could do, but really to help you think about what ink you're going to choose is just to think about, am I going to colour this or go over the top of it in a different medium? And if you are, then that's the time to think about what sort of ink you're going to use. So what I thought I'd do just to start off with is, in one of the previous videos we just had a very quick look at stamping a couple of designs here in a clear stamp and a red rubber stamp, and we used a VersaFine Clair that we know from previous videos is a pigment ink pad that's also oil based. So that's going to play really nicely with things like our watercolour pencils, watercolour paints, going over the top with all sorts of different mediums. So we'll come to those in a minute and I'll show you the difference. But what I thought it would be really nice to do just to start with is maybe use same stamp design but go in with a dye based ink pad. So this time I've chosen just for to mix it up and show you the differences, just to remind you of the acrylic block and our friend the cling back on the red rubber stamp. Put that on my acrylic block like so. I've got a dye based ink pad here, actually that's the oxide, that's dye and pigment, there we go. That's the dye based ink pad, and there is a slight difference in them, it's not just the label. You can see one has got the black casing, one's got a darker or lighter grey casing, so you can tell the difference quite quick between them, as well as looking at the labels. But you've got the dye-based, water-based ink pad here. So this is a nice traditional ink pad. I'm going to go in with the ink over the red rubber stamp, and you may notice, you may pick up that the coverage onto the red rubber stamp isn't quite as good as the VersaFine Clair. Now that's not a bad thing or a good thing, it's lots of different techniques, still get nice coverage. And what I'm not doing is pouncing my ink really hard. I'm not pushing down, I'm just lightly tapping and moving the ink pad all the way over the stamped image in exactly the same way as I did with the pigment based. I'm just making sure that I've got that stamped image coloured and covered up. Then I'm going to just apply that in the middle and just give it a light press down and then hold it in place, and with my other fingers, as I was explaining before, just apply a little bit of pressure, walking it around to make sure that all areas of the design is stamped. And the great thing with this one in particular is the design is on the back there of the cling mount, so I can see exactly where I'm pushing down. I'm also not lifting it away really quickly, I'm just letting it sit there, let that ink transfer down into the fibres of the cardstock, because we know as a dye-based ink, that's exactly what it's doing. It's dyeing the pigment, dyeing the fibres of our cardstock there, and there we go, we've got a lovely crisp image. Now I'm just going to pop that onto one side. I'm not too worried about cleaning that up straight away because we know it's only water-based dye ink, so really no stress with that whatsoever. I'm going to bring back in our pigment and oil-based stamp designs there, and you can see the difference, how one's soaked in. It's not quite as strong as this one here. Again, nothing's right or wrong, it all depends on what you're looking for. If anything, I quite like, this almost looks like sort of an illustrative sort of book effect, and if I wanted to go for something a little bit aged, that would look really nice. But let me go in here now with a little bit of water and also some paints, just to show the difference. I'm just going to take a couple of 3 colours here and just mix some water in these. So these are purely a solid water caked water paint. I've just got my water brush there and I want to pick up plenty of water. I'm just going to go in over the top of this, and I'm not keeping inside the lines, I'm just wanting to get some water onto this stamped image, and I'm not even too worried about what colour I've chosen here. This is just to show you the purposes of what I'm trying to explain, because what's going to happen is that dye ink that we've put down, I can already see it's making that colour go really dark, because what's happening is the water is reacting. If I just clean my brush off, the water is actually reacting with that water-based dye. Can you see how that's smudging that area? So I can go in with my water. If I was wearing watercolours, I wouldn't choose a dye-based, water-based ink pad necessarily to do watercolouring, because you can see straight away it's blurring the edges of my stamped image. Now, in contrast, if we go to our pigment-based and oil-based ink pad that we did here, which was a VersaFine Clair, again, I'll just take the purple, just because it shows up nice and clear here on the overhead for you, go in over the top of this. Can you see straight away that has stayed so much brighter over the top of that black ink? It's not moving any of that black ink around whatsoever. I know I could have chosen a green, but I'm just doing this just to show the contrast between the two. But also what I want to do is just add some clean water straight over the top of this image. And I can go in there quite heavy with a lot of water. Can you see that's not moving any of that stamped image around whatsoever? So I could quite safely go into this stamped image with my watercolours and it would colour up absolutely perfectly with an oil-based and pigment-based ink pad. Now you'll find that if you experiment, different ink pads will behave and work in different ways. But if I just go right back to what we looked at a few videos ago, this one here, it was our friend the Pigment ink pad, and what I'm talking about here is these ones down here. It's Pigment ink that was oil-based, not water-based, because all these water-based ones are potentially going to reactivate and move around with water. Same with our dye-based. There's our distress ink that we looked at, and the distress ink is water-based, so we know it's going to react with water. If I'd chosen an archival ink pad that's also dye-based, then that wouldn't have been reacted to water and it would have stayed absolutely dead fast onto my cardstock, just like that one did there. So that's just a couple of very quick differences, just applying water. Now the other thing, as well as, and obviously I was just going over there with very quick with an awful lot of water, the same would apply if I was spritzing water over the top to create a background, maybe a different technique. If I was actually going to use acrylic paints which are water-based, that's something to be mindful of. So just think about either what you're stamping over the top of or what you're going to do to your stamped image afterwards could determine what ink pad you possibly choose. And then obviously at the moment I'm just using black ink pads here, but you've got a whole multitude of colours of those VersaFine that we looked at earlier on. We've got the purples and the blues and the greens, massive, massive family of colours. So don't forget you can use coloured inks, not just black, but you can use your coloured inks to colour up your stamped images as well. Again, it's so, so versatile. So alcohol markers. We know that alcohol markers, being alcohol based, are going to play quite nicely with something like this oil-based VersaFine Clair without any problems. I can go over the top again. I'm going to go over very, very crudely with this just to show that that underlying colour isn't going to move at all. I can even go over some of these really big black areas and I can see that that alcohol content of our marker isn't shifting our black ink at all with that. And I could likewise go over the top of my dye-based ink pad, which is water-based, and again, it's not going to be affected once it's dry by an alcohol marker. However, something that could be affected by an alcohol marker and possibly move your ink around because it's similar is something that's going to be solvent-based, which we learnt before could be our StazOn and also potentially even the alcohol. Even though that is oil-based and dye, it can have a tendency sometimes to be reactivated and moved around by a alcohol marker. But certainly your StazOn, being solvent-based, is going to turn around and possibly move around, and worse still, possibly colour the nib of your pen when you're colouring around the edges. So you're actually better off using something, as we've seen there, like a pigment ink or even a dye ink to work with when you're using your alcohol markers. So that's just a very, very quickly a little bit of a right and a wrong way of thinking about how you may want to choose what type of ink pad you're using. And what I've actually got here is something I've done previously. It's just to show you kind of how I work, if you like, just kind of showing the bare bones. But sometimes I will take a stamp, as I've just done right there in front of you, stamp it out, and 2 or 3 different stamped images even if I want to remind myself what ink pad will work with what, I can turn around and have a look and just go, okay, this is the VersaFine Clair, that's a StazOn, that's a Memento, that's a dye-based ink, and I can apply water, I can apply alcohol inks, I can apply alcohol markers, and I can just see the type of effect I want to get before I start using my ink pad. So there's no shame and no harm whatsoever in actually going ahead and doing little test pieces like this, and actually maybe write down in the corner a little tip, just what ink you use and what you've gone over the top of it. Put it to one side, and then it's a great way of just building up a bit of a catalogue of what works and what doesn't for your particular style. Sometimes you may actually want to create this sort of nice sort of watered down effect. It's entirely up to you. Like I said, there is no right or wrong. It's just achieving the effect that you want. So I hope that's helped just demystify a little bit more further about the different types of ink pads and actually seeing how they are generally affected by using water and alcohol in different ways, and even after they're dry, just how they can be reactivated. So we're going to have a little look at a few other different types of techniques and how we can use that activation of water and colour to actually create backgrounds and get them to do things that we want for us in different ways and make them even more creative. Because ink pads aren't just all about stamping. You can use ink pads in loads and loads of different ways. It is, after all, just a colouring medium. So use it to your advantage, get the most value out of it. So make sure you like and subscribe and hit the bells below here on the HobbyMaker tutorial YouTube channel, and then you'll be kept up to date with all the latest videos, and we'll be able to share some more tips with you how you can get even more creative with the craft stash that you've got. Until then, I'll see you soon.